My name is Mariah Loftin, and I am the clinical therapist in the young adult teams. And I would like to talk with you tonight about self-care. So, self-care both for yourself as well as for students in the field. The first thing that comes up around self-care is really what happened before your child came to Open Sky. There's an element of you're in survival mode, and really which way is up. And I think it's key that when you come into Open Sky, you have a support system here. And we want to move out of this place of being in survival mode and ultimately moving into a mode of being aware of what do we need and how do we take care of it. And so one of the pieces of being in survival mode is that we often don't even know what we need. And so we need to discover which way is up. We need to put our oxygen masks on. So now that you have arrived at Open Sky, there's a couple things that are going on, both for your child and for yourself. And I would imagine those things are amidst others, but the main things are a sense of grief and a sense of relief. And I think it's absolutely natural to be experiencing both. That on one hand, there's this grief of your child being here at Open Sky, being away from you. And then in the same moment, there's a relief of, I can rest, I can breathe. And for your child here, there's a grief of being away from their friends, being away from their home. And then in the same moment, there's a relief around, I am held. I am given an opportunity to be supported and to feel. So let's talk about grief and relief a little bit more. There's the grief cycle, and there's some resources at the bottom there if you would like to use them. And please feel free to type in any questions as we go along. I can answer them as we can. So the grief cycle, I think a lot of people are familiar with, and it consists of denial. So when a student first gets here, I don't need to be here, I've learned what I've needed to learn, and then moves into potentially being angry at themselves, angry at their parents, and moving into a place of depression and trying to understand what's happening here and really grieving what has been. So the life that they were in, the culture that they were in, because coming into Open Sky, it is a different culture, that they're living outside. And similarly, you are in amidst a different culture. And what's important, an important support in this culture is really being able to recognize that you are not alone, that there are other parents on this website, on this webinar right now. And so there is a place of holding for your child and yourself in that depression. And we can move into bargaining and then into acceptance. And the key that happens when we get to that place of acceptance is the grief is not done. That we can go back into depression, into the denial, into the anger. And we need to simply have room for the emotions that come up. What's key about creating space for the grief here is that just as we deal with emotions, we do not stuff it away. We create room for it to really get air. And so I liken grief to many people kind of stuff it in a cauldron or in a pot, and they want to slam the lid on that pot. And what is so culturally different here at Open Sky is that we take that lid off intentionally. And we make sure that we hold each other in the emotions. We don't rescue each other. So what I mean by that is we don't try and take someone's grief away or say, it's okay, you don't have to feel that way. We give each other room to actually feel what's coming up. And in that, We can move through it. And that is absolutely key while students are here and for yourself at home. That's absolutely key. And so giving yourself that room, what we do as students are here, and you'll hear it through other webinars as well as on your parent phone calls, that we encourage students to bust I feels. And busting an I feel is making an I feel statement. I feel angry because I am at Open Sky. I imagine I feel this way because, and going through that, my hope for myself and my hope for you. And so the goal is really to give yourself room to feel the anger, to feel the depression. And that allows you to move through this cycle naturally and come to a place of acceptance. And so I think what's important for you being at home is give yourself the room to miss your child whenever that comes up. You don't have to push it away. You don't have to stuff it down. And we'll talk about some tools that you can use throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, and that really support you feeling rather than stuffing it into that pot and shutting that lid. The other piece that you will experience naturally and that a lot of students experience here or come to is a sense of relief, because there is room for you to just be yourself. You can attend to your needs, you can attend to your feelings, and you can give yourself that moment of just relaxing. And what frequently happens when you're in survival mode is everything is about someone else rather than taking time to exercise or eat the food that you want to eat, reading the books that you want to read. And so this is a time for you to take for yourself. What about you? That's an absolute key. And the relief part comes from finally there's time for you. And similarly, the students in the field have a sense of relief because finally they're in a place where their emotions can be heard and they learn how to express their emotions. And so the important part about this is that there is room rather than shutting it down. And they learn the basic communication skills to deal with all of the emotions that come up within them. And how do they ultimately communicate with one another? So if there is conflict that comes up, we talk about it. We stop and talk about it. There is room. And what's created is a supportive environment. And the groups out in our field, it's all about emotional safety. And so there is this sense of community, and every person in the group, guides, therapists, students, are here to support one another. And the students are here to support each other through their own process. And they learn the skills in order to do so. And so that culture, they learn about each other, they get closer to each other, and you will notice as they go through the graduation process that other students, their peers, know more about them than friends that they've had for 10 years. And that is a sense of absolute community, and it's that they need to risk being vulnerable. And so that is an exciting piece that ends up coming, and that's a sense of relief for them. They are held in their community, sometimes for the very first time. This brings us to our wellness plan. In order for us to have room for the emotions that we experience, we have to know, how do we put our oxygen mask on? How do we stop being in survival mode? So students that come into the field can frequently have different things that they use for coping. So whether it's drug use or anger management or failing school, whatever it is that's coming up, that is the presenting issue. And what I always talk about with my students is, what are the things that are happening beneath? So what are the needs beneath those presenting issues? What are the needs beneath all of those symptoms? And so what we need to do is learn how to address those needs, create room for those needs. So what is your oxygen mask? What is it like to not be in survival? And here's a plan that we can really head forward on. It's tangible. One of the pieces that is absolutely crucial is we can talk all day long about what's happening with us, but if we don't translate that into walking the talk, then that is not good enough. And so what we really work on out here with students is practicing what we're talking about. And so everything that we're talking about tonight around self-care and around a wellness plan are practiced with our students out in the field. And we need to be able to practice these pieces in order to take them with us. And we are looking at overall health, overall self-care. And the first one in that is your mind. And there are all different kinds of things that you can do to take care of your mind. And so what I encourage you to do right now is bring out a pencil and a paper and write down what are the things that feed your mind. And I imagine that each of us have different pieces that really tantalize our minds. And for our students out in the field, they read books, and they read books particularly around what are the things that are happening for them. If it's addiction, then they'll read books about addiction. If it's adoption, they'll read books about adoption. And so they become very educated and experts on themselves. And that's a key, because we want to become experts on ourselves throughout our lives. And what do we need to do in order to take care of that need? A wellness plan, where particularly addressing your mind, this is not something that is necessarily negotiable. You need to put it into effect for this well-rounded person to live in your life. And similarly, for our students in the field, we need them to be able to learn how to nurture their minds. And so here are some suggestions as far as writing in your journal for at least 10 minutes. So one of the things that I talked about before was, what is it that you can do to actually take the lid off of that pot? And you can carry a journal around, particularly if you're experiencing a lot of grief, transition, any kind of stressors in your life. And this is definitely one of them. So if you've moved, started a job, started a new relationship, broken up, divorce, all of those things, obviously death in the family, those pieces need some nurturance. And so one of the ways that you can take the lid off of that pot is by just journaling. You can carry it around with you and take 5 minutes to just journal what's coming up for you. That means that you're not stuffing it down. Or maybe it's that you journal every morning. Students in the field will take time, it's called personal time or P time, and they will take time to write in their journals, complete therapy assignments, or track what their mood is at. So if their anxiety, depression, whatever it is that's coming up for them, they track it on a scale of 1 to 10. And I encourage them, if they're doing this kind of tracking, to take a kind of a check of their mind, body, heart, and soul. And you'll notice that each of those are what we'll go through in this wellness plan. And so they get a sense of what's happening in each of those areas. And so if their mind is very active when they have anxiety, then they can track, oh, when my mind is active and racing, what's happening with my body? What's happening inside of me? And then they can make change and they can bring in their coping skills, rather than just letting their mind run away from them and resulting sometimes in a panic attack. So that allows us to really come back to using the skills that we've been learning, using those coping skills and calming down, learning how to help ourselves calm down. Absolutely key. Other things that nurture our minds: reading a book, going to the library. One of the elements of our students is that they come in so plugged in into the internet, video games, whether it's, Facebook, email. There are so many different pieces of technology that our young generation is tuned into these days. And what's it like to turn off your cell phone? What's it like to turn off the television and actually connect with another person? Some people have a struggle at it. If you have dinner with a friend, can you both turn your phones off and actually connect? Rather than, checking text messages or emails as they come in. So just tracking, what is it that actually distracts us from being present? A wellness plan is really about coming back to the present moment. And in this instance of your mind, how do you come back to being aware of what is going on in your mind? The next part of the wellness plan is your body. And obviously, students in the field, self-care is absolutely primary. What happens for students that struggle with self-care is they become dependent on someone else, most likely you. And so when we teach them to put on layers to keep themselves warm, set up a shelter for themselves, or to drink enough water throughout the day, eat food that's good for them, and talking about the whole grains and nutrition part of being here, that is nurturing their body. They also obviously participate in yoga and meditation. They learn to cook meals as they're here, and they learn the teamwork of cooking meals together. They also exercise by hiking, and it's not as we're hiking, it's not just walking. There's an encouragement of learning different ways of connecting with each other, connecting with the environment around them, and noticing. One of my students recently felt very distracted by the anxiety happening inside of him. And one of the practices is to slow down and notice what is around you. Notice the sunset. What colors? What are the variations? How long does the sun stay out? Allowing ourselves to take that time to nurture our bodies and be aware of what's happening in our bodies in order to give it food and drink that is healthy for it. So I think every year people make New Year's resolutions. And for you, as your student is here, as your child is here at Open Sky, make a commitment to yourself. And as you're writing down on your pad of paper, write down what are the things that you will commit to for yourself every week, every day. And get very, very specific, because if you say things like, I'm going to drink enough water or eat regularly, it's too abstract. So how much water will you drink each day? How much are you going to exercise and when? So getting very, very tangible, very specific. If we don't get specific, then it's much harder to carry it through. And so one of the things that our students do out here is they create a wellness plan before they graduate. And the emphasis is making it practical, making it achievable, and making it something that is actually rewarding for you. We don't want to create a wellness plan that is going to really elicit failure. And so if we make it specific, we move from a place of it being very abstract and into a place of here are the details and this is how I'm going to carry it out. And that allows us to actually follow through. And sometimes we're going to slip up. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. It's not about being perfect. It's about coming back to our intention and heading forward again. That's absolutely key. So what is it for you that is self-care of your body? Write those down and get as specific as you can. Now we'll move to your heart. What are the things that nurture our hearts? I talked about the groups out here being absolutely supportive. And the emphasis is entirely on that emotional safety that we create. And so a key of students out here is defining what is emotional safety. So what's emotional safety in the field, and what's emotional safety in our lives? What kind of people do we surround ourselves with? So students in the field talk about emotional safety as a culture that they create and nurture and feed. And that means that they have to take risks with one another. So if there's a disagreement in the group, they're living with each other 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That conflict is going to come out. That gives them an opportunity to practice. So we can talk about it, but when you move to that place of being able to practice what you're talking about, that is absolutely key. And so what they do is break it down into basic communication with the I feel statement, busting an I feel. And I feel, I imagine I feel this way, my hope for myself and my hope for you. That's the basics of communication, and it is reflected. So after a person busts an I feel, the other person reflects that I feel back. It can be directed at the group, at one person, or just stating, this is what's going on for me right now. It can be positive, and it can be hard emotions as well. It doesn't matter. It's about expressing them and reflecting them back. What's key is the person who reflects. So I hear you feel, you imagine you feel this way. Once that person is done, they say, do you feel heard? And what that does is it creates absolute communication and allows the other person to say, yes, I did feel heard. Thank you. And that creates emotional safety. That is the way that we head into conflicts and difficult emotions. So that is a way, that is part of how we create this support for each person's heart as they're here. And that is ultimately the group dynamic. And so for you at home, what is it that is your emotionally safe community? Or what can you do to nurture that emotional safety for yourself? So many people share things with people that they're connected to, their friends, their family. And also, similarly, keeping a feelings journal. That can be very helpful where you carry it with you. You can express that grief rather than bottling it up. Looking at what are the support groups that are available for you? And what is it that brings you joy? Is it painting? Is it music? I think it's really important to, one, identify what is it that nurtures our hearts, and to put that down on your pad of paper, because that gives you the opportunity to just notice. So creating a list of the things that nurture your heart. Students in the field, when they are putting their wellness plan together, whether it's heading, in their plan after open sky, whatever that looks like, we want to make sure that they're taking as good of care of themselves as possible, making it absolutely realistic. And so many students will talk about a nurturance of their heart is actually seeing their therapist or talking with their family once a week because they have been disconnected from their family, or maybe not communicating with their family the way that they wanted to. And so looking at what are the ways that you can re-enter your heart. Oftentimes when we're in a state of survival, we close parts of ourselves down. Our heart is sometimes the first. And when we start to bring light into our hearts, it allows us to be much more open. And key is we're open with other people, we're also open with ourselves. The next piece beyond your heart is your soul. And for different people, soul has different meanings. It can be a spiritual relationship, it can be a religious one, or it can just simply being present in nature. There are a lot of different ways to nurture your soul. I think the key of your soul is, once again, being present. So how is it that you're present with yourself, your connection with your belief or your connection with nature and things that are around you. It's so important for our students as they're out here to, one, obviously be connected with one another, but how do they connect with themselves? How do they connect with the nature that surrounds them? Part of wilderness therapy is giving our students an opportunity to discover what nature is. Many of my students come out and they've never spent time out in nature. And so it can be daunting. It can be a bit scary. It can also be very, very exciting and rewarding. One of my students just a couple weeks ago was out on expedition with their team, and were up on a knoll with all the rest of their group and saw a herd of elk running down the valley. And he reflected to his parents, like, you won't believe what I just saw. This is the most amazing thing I have ever seen in my life. 100 elk running past me. He was absolutely present to their breath, their sound, the hoofbeats, the noises they were making to one another. That allowed him to be connected. What is it that makes you connected? That is so important. Recognizing how we spend much of our lives plugged into the television, computer, phone. And it's actually not connection. Many of my students come in and they have been addicted to video games or going from site to site to site on the internet. And that is draining in a lot of ways. Some will say, well, I actually get to interact with people on the internet. Yes, there's a truth to that. And you're not present with them. You're not hearing their voice. You're not actually sitting in front of them. And there's something that gets shut off in our brains and not as open to one another. And so what I encourage you all to do is to look at what is it that you need to be connected in order to be connected to your soul. So is it that you want to wake up in the morning and write down your dreams? Or do you want to pray or meditate? And sometimes it's going to church. Sometimes it's doing yoga. Whatever it is for you, write down the details of what that entails and making a plan, making it solid. So once again, we want to make it tangible and achievable so that you can then carry it out. With our students in the field, if you say, I'm going to meditate every single day and I'm going to do yoga every single day, there are some students that have more ambitious goals and they're not realistic. And so we want to really break them down into realistic goals that will end up being something you succeed at. So maybe it's spending time to go to a yoga class once a week, once a month. What is it that's feasible for you to ultimately nurture your soul? Absolutely key. And what happens after you've done your mind, body, heart, soul, you compile those into a wellness plan. And that is your plan of self-care heading forward. It's a plan. It's one that you can create goals out of. And it's a time for you to really stand back and reflect, like, well, what is your wellness plan? And your goals that you have there, and then evaluating where have you actually been spending your time. So students that come into the field, it's very interesting for them to have a comparison. So when they first come in, looking at what are the things that I have been spending my time doing? Playing video games for 8 hours a day. Things like that. Or what is it that you want to be doing? Connecting with people 8 hours a day or once a day. And so notice what are the ways that you are spending your time. And there are things in our lives that we need to do. Going to work or going grocery shopping, cleaning the bathroom, whatever it is that we actually do need to take care of in order to create a life for ourselves that is healthy. Absolutely. And in the same moment, we need to be aware of the bigger picture. And when we have our wellness plan hung up on the wall or in front of us on our desk, whatever location, if you stick it in a drawer, it's going to disappear. So you have to put it in a place that's noticeable and have that reflection time of what is it that I have been doing in comparison to what I want to be doing. So what would you like more of? What would you like to stay the same? And ultimately, what would you like to change? What are your hopes and dreams for yourself? The wellness plan is really a stepping stone approach. So you move from here's where I am now. So noticing how you spend your time now, and then where do you want to be? So maybe where you want to be is up here, but where you're starting is here. You have to make the stepping stones in between. Otherwise, this goal is not approachable. So with our students in the field, we need to have those stepping stones. I call them, let's take bite-sized pieces. And we break down the goals that we want to achieve into those smaller pieces in order to get where we want to go. It's a pretty unsophisticated way of achieving, where we want to head. And in the same moment, it's absolutely key. And so what we do with our students is having them create this wellness plan, but also looking down the line. So if you make a timeline, you can put, well, in the last 10 years, this is what I've been doing. Let's break it down. And then look out, well, in a year, this is where I want to be. In 2 years, in 3 years, in 10 years, in 50 years. What do I want my life to look like? What are the qualities of my life? And where do I want to be amidst them? So a key of that is being really honest with yourself, for one, and having an understanding of what's the reality of my life, and that I'm not actually where I want to be. And I imagine for you all as parents, being in survival mode, taking care of someone else, it's very, very difficult to take care of yourself. And so now this is a time for you to reorient. How can you take care of yourself? How can you make those bite-sized pieces ultimately to get where you want to get, that is health? How do you reach your hopes, and how do you reach your dreams for yourself, separate from everyone else? So there are goals where you nurture your family, your son or your daughter. Those are good goals. And I challenge you to also look at goals that are just for you. What are things that nurture you separate from everyone else? What are meals that you want to cook for yourself? What are activities, movies that you want to see just for you? And similarly, for your children in the field, we challenge them to look at, beyond what your parents want for you, what do you want for you? How do you evaluate, what is it that I want to do with my life, particularly for our young adults? Looking at their long-term goals. Do I want to go to college? What are the steps that I need in order to get there? What kind of support do I need to put in place? Rather than making a dream of someday I want to be a doctor, great, step one. You need to learn how to study. You need to show up for class. And part of that translates from here at Open Sky. How do they show up every day for their group? How do they show up in their assignments and completing those assignments? It's key to practice what they're doing doing here so that they can take it with them. It needs to translate after Open Sky. So as you are at Open Sky, there's support for you here. And I think what's really important is for you to understand the gamut of support that is available. One of the keys to me is Wellness Weekend. I had a parent that came to Wellness Weekend, and she and her husband came early in the process. And she relayed to me, this was one of the most important things that I experienced at Open Sky early on, because it created a bridge of communication between myself and my child. It allowed me to understand the language, the process that they were going through. It allowed me to understand my own grief cycle. And then I could write my letters to them each week differently. And ultimately, when they met them at graduation, there was an opportunity for them to come together and have an understanding, and not as much of a gap, but there was really a bridge of understanding that he and his mom had been speaking the same language. So there was more that they could connect around. It was absolutely key. And the Wellness Weekend is a time that you can come and spend here at Open Sky, where you don't see your child, but you kind of learn the nuts and bolts that your child is learning out in the field over the course of a kind of a longer weekend. And I think it also allows you to feel less isolated, because there are other parents here that you can connect to, and that you're not an island. You do have similar experiences. There is support available for you. And a lot of those parents end up keeping in touch with one another so that they can continue to support each other even beyond Open Sky. We have some alumni families that definitely continue to be in touch and support one another heading forward. So I think it's absolutely vital that if you can, come to a Wellness Weekend. Another ongoing support is the Sunday night parent phone call. You don't have to leave home in order to attend this. It's every single Sunday night. It's frequently led by Norman, who leads our meditation out in the field with our students. And it is a lot about awareness, and it's a lot about connection. So once again, a resource for you that is available, and I think is really, really important as well. There's the weekly phone call that you have with your therapist that I obviously think is very supportive and allows you to understand what's happening with my child right now. What are our goals heading forward? Things like that. And then our parent webpage and our website in general. On that website, you will see things like the family pathway, the student pathway, a whole list of webinars. I think we have upwards of 16 or 17 at this point. And if you have questions, well, what about this while my child is at Open Sky? You should look at that at the webinars, because they allow you to really educate yourself and being able to listen to other therapists that are in the field and get a deeper understanding of the 4 directions, or how do I write an impact letter? Things like that are on the webinar as well. There's a resource list of books that are really available and helpful to address everything from trauma, adoption, to addictions. So I would encourage you to look at that as well. There's also research on there that supports what Wilderness does, so you can look at those resources there. And beyond that, I think the most important key is that you are connected and part of this community at Open Sky. And your child, as they are here, are part of this greater community and are absolutely supported. And that is key. We are connected, we are not alone, and that allows us ultimately to better our self-care. And I think what's key for ourselves now, and I think the commitment that you need to make to yourself, is what can you do tomorrow? What can you do tonight in order to take a step forward in the direction of better self-care for yourselves? Being aware of your mind, your body, your heart, and your soul. What do each of those need? One of the things that our students do as they're in the field is check in with one another. So there's busting I feels to each other. There's also called busting a 4-line, or a 4-line feeling check. So as you're sitting right now, I want you to take a moment and let yourself be present to what's happening in your body. Where are there stressors? Where are the muscles that are tight? How does your stomach feel? Are your feet flat on the floor? Notice when you pay attention to the parts of your body that are tight, it gives them room to relax. Now move to, where is your mind at? Is it full of chatter? Is it racing? Is it calm? Move to, where's your heart? Is it open? Is it connected? Is it closed? Is it aching? Where's your soul at? Are you present in it? Are you connected to it? Giving yourself the room to go through, where is your mind, your body, your heart, your soul? You can do that 4-line feeling check throughout your day. It allows you to take that moment to be aware. And just like paying attention to those tight muscles, it allows them to relax, allows them to give the tension away. So as your child is in the field, they are doing this as well. Something you should know heading forward is that this personal wellness plan, there's a template and there are guidelines that are on the parent page of the website, and it's in your family pathway. So a lot of the mind, body, heart, soul, you will notice that your family pathway addresses these details. So what are you journaling about this week? What is it that you need to communicate and write to your child this week? Your parent assignments on that family pathway are really geared towards this piece of self-care. So thank you so much for participating tonight. And if you have any last questions, please feel free to write them, or they can be asked on in the survey later on as well via email. Take care and practice good self-care.